The ship was dying. Commander Elias Vance could hear it in the way the engines coughed and sputtered. He could see it in the warning lights that blinked red across his control panel. For 3 years, he had kept the old shuttle alive through will and spare parts alone. Now, drifting through the cold emptiness of the outer spiral, he knew the end had finally come. He did not feel afraid. Fear required hope. And Elias had buried his hope 3 years ago at the Battle of Meridian 9. He had watched his entire fleet burn that day. 2,000 ships. 40,000 souls. All gone in a flash of light and fire while he floated in an escape pod, unable to do anything but survive. Earth's coalition had declared him dead along with the others. No rescue came. No search party. Just silence and the endless black of space. When the Zithirani patrol vessel appeared on his damaged sensors, Elias did not try to run. He simply sat in his pilot chair and waited. The massive alien ship swallowed his shuttle like a whale swallowing a minnow. Soldiers in gleaming armor surrounded him within minutes. They were tall creatures, standing nearly 3 meters high. Their bodies were covered in hard shells that looked like crystal. Their eyes were large and compound like insects from old Earth. They clicked and hissed at each other in a language he could not understand. One of them struck him across the face. Another placed a metal collar around his neck. They did not speak to him. To them, he was not worth speaking to. Elias was taken to a place called Throne Station. It was not really a station at all. It was a small moon that had been hollowed out and turned into the greatest fortress in the known galaxy. It orbited the Zithirani homeworld like a crown jewel, visible from the planet's surface as a second sun. Inside its metal walls lived millions of beings, most of them slaves. The Zithirani had been conquering worlds for longer than humanity had existed. Their empire, called the Celestial Dominion, stretched across 47 star systems. Their queen, Cythera the Eternal, had ruled for over 3,000 years. Some said she was immortal. Others said she had simply learned how to cheat death. Either way, she was the most powerful being in the galaxy. And her word was absolute law. Elias was thrown into the slave pits on the lowest levels of Throne Station. The air was thick with dust and the smell of unwashed bodies. Thousands of aliens from dozens of different species worked here, mining rare minerals from the moon's core. They hauled heavy rocks with bleeding hands. They operated dangerous machines that sometimes crushed them without warning. They died by the hundreds every cycle. And new slaves arrived to replace them. The neural collar around his neck was connected to a central computer. If he disobeyed, if he worked too slowly, if he even thought about resistance, the collar would send pain shooting through his entire body. Elias learned this lesson quickly on his first day when he stopped to help a fallen worker. The pain dropped him to his knees and left him gasping for air. Days passed, then weeks. Elias fell into the rhythm of the pits. Wake up. Work. Eat a small meal of something that tasted like wet cardboard. Work more. Sleep on a hard floor. Repeat. The other slaves did not speak to him at first. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the war between Earth and the Dominion made them objects of suspicion. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small glances. Elias would catch other slaves watching him when they thought he was not looking. A Korvathi merchant with 7 eyes and gray skin studied him for days before finally approaching. The Korvathi were known as traders and engineers, a peaceful species that had been conquered centuries ago. The old merchant sat beside Elias during a meal break. Her name was Vela, and she spoke in a soft voice that seemed too gentle for such a harsh place. "You are human," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Elias replied. "What of it?" Vela's 7 eyes blinked, one after another. "There is an old story among my people. A prophecy, written long ago by beings we call the architects. They were the first intelligent species in the galaxy, the ones who planted the seeds of life on countless worlds. Before they disappeared, they left behind warnings and predictions." Elias took a bite of his tasteless food. "I do not believe in prophecies. Belief is not required," Vela said. "The prophecy speaks of a time when darkness would cover all the stars. when the Dominion's shadow would stretch so far that hope itself would become a forgotten word. In that time, a being would rise from the species of defiance, not through strength of body, but strength of spirit. This being would remind the galaxy that chains can be broken. And do you think that being is me? Elias almost laughed. I am no one. I am a failed commander who watched his people die. I could not save them. I cannot even save myself. Bela placed a wrinkled hand on his arm. The prophecy does not speak of a warrior who never fails. It speaks of one who fails and continues anyway. One who walks through fire and does not burn. We have waited 3,000 years for the Unchained One, and now, here you are. Elias looked around the slave pits. He saw broken bodies and empty eyes. He saw species that had forgotten their own histories, their own pride, their own names. He saw exactly what the Dominion wanted him to see, a place where hope came to die. But somewhere deep inside him, in a place he thought had gone cold forever, something stirred. It was small and weak, like a candle flame in a storm. It was the same feeling he had felt years ago. When he first joined the coalition and swore to protect humanity among the stars, I am not a legend, he said quietly. Vela smiled, showing teeth that had been worn down by age and hardship. Not yet, but legends are not born. They are made one small act of defiance at a time. She stood up and walked away, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. Around him, the slave pits continued their endless grinding work. Guards marched past with weapons ready. The neural collars hummed with quiet threat. And Elias Vance, the man who had given up on everything, found himself wondering if maybe he still had one more fight left in him after all. He did not know it yet, but the seeds of rebellion had just been planted. And high above, in a throne room made of crystal and starlight, an ancient queen would soon learn that some species simply refused to stay broken. 3 months passed in the slave pits, a throne station. Elias Vance learned the rhythms of this terrible place. He learned which guards were cruel for pleasure and which were simply doing their jobs. He learned which tunnels were watched closely and which were forgotten. He learned the names of the other slaves, even when they tried to forget those names themselves. That was his first act of quiet. Rebellion. Names. The Dominion wanted slaves to be numbers. They wanted workers who had forgotten their homes, their families, their identities. A slave with no name was a slave with no past, and a slave with no past had nothing to fight for. So Elias asked questions. He sat with aliens of all shapes and sizes during meal breaks and asked them simple things. What was your world like? Did you have a family? What did you dream of before you came here? At first, they did not answer. They looked at him with confused eyes, as if he were speaking a language they had forgotten. But slowly, carefully, the words began to come. A young Delphine named Cora told him about the oceans of her homeworld, where her people swam through forests of glowing coral. She had been taken as a child and barely remembered the taste of salt water, but when she spoke of it, her large dark eyes grew wet with tears. She did not know she could still cry. A Graxi warrior named Torvin told him about the fighting pits where his people once proved their honor in fair combat. The Dominion had conquered his world 200 years ago, and his people had become laborers instead of warriors. But Torvin still remembered the old fighting forms. His forearms still knew how to move with deadly purpose. An elderly Korvathi engineer named Hess told him about the great machines his people once built, ships that could cross the galaxy in days instead of weeks. The Dominion used Korvathi engineers, but never let them build anything except tools of war and chains of control. Elias listened to all of them. He remembered their stories, and in doing so, he gave them back something the Dominion had stolen, the knowledge that their lives had meaning. The old merchant, Bala, watched all of this with her 7 eyes. She said nothing, but Elias could feel her approval, like warmth from a distant fire. The turning point came on a cold cycle. When the air recyclers were failing and everyone shivered in the tunnels, a young Korvathi girl named Mira had been caught stealing food from a supply cart. She was barely more than a child, thin and hungry and desperate. The punishment for theft was public execution. The guards dragged her to the central chamber where all the slaves could see. They forced her to her knees. One guard raised an energy blade that hummed with killing light. He announced her crime in a loud voice, making sure everyone heard. This was not just punishment. It was a message. Elias stood in the crowd with the others. He felt the familiar weight of helplessness that had crushed him for years. He was one man. He had no weapons. His collar would drop him the moment he acted. There was nothing he could do. But then he looked at Mira. She was crying silently, her small body shaking with fear. She reminded him of his daughter, one he had lost at Meridianine, when the escape pods failed to launch in time. Something inside Elias broke. Or perhaps something finally healed. He pushed through the crowd. The other slaves gasped and pulled away from him. The guards turned with their weapons raised. Elias felt his collar begin to heat up, warning him of the pain to come. He did not stop. In his hand was a piece of broken mining equipment he had picked up cycles ago. It was sharp and heavy, nothing more than scrap metal. But in the hands of a man who had fought across a dozen worlds, it was enough. The first guard fell before he could react. Elias moved with speed that surprised even himself. Years of combat training returning like muscle memory. He struck the second guard in the joint of his crystalline armor. The third guard fired his weapon, but Elias was already moving, using the fallen body as a shield. The collar activated. Pain exploded through his body like lightning. His muscles seized. His vision went white. Any normal slave would have collapsed, would have surrendered to the agony and begged for mercy. Elias kept moving. He did not know how. Later, Vela would tell him it was because the collars were designed for slaves, for beings who had accepted their fate. They worked by attacking the will as much as the body. But Elias had never accepted anything. His mind simply refused to believe that pain could stop him. The fourth guard died with a broken neck. Elias grabbed Mira and ran. The tunnels became a maze of shadows and echoing footsteps. Other slaves appeared from nowhere, blocking corridors and creating confusion. Cora the Delphine led them through a flooded section that the guards could not follow. Torvin the Graxi held a checkpoint long enough for them to escape into the deep tunnels. When they finally stopped, surrounded by darkness and the distant drip of water, Myra looked up at Elias with wide eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" Elias did not have a good answer. He sat down heavily, his body still twitching from the collar's punishment. Everything hurt. He had probably made himself a target for execution. He had gained nothing practical. But when he looked at the others who had helped him, at Cora and Torvin and the dozens of slaves who had risked everything to save one small girl, he understood. "Because that is what humans do," he said finally. "We help each other. Even when it makes no sense. Even when it costs us everything." Word spread through the slave pits like fire through dry grass. A human had defied the guards. A human had beaten the collar. A human had reminded them all that resistance was possible, for the first time in centuries. The slaves of Throne Station began to believe, and far above in the gleaming spires of the upper levels. Reports began to reach the ears of those who had never worried about slaves before. Something was changing in the lower depths. Something that made the old order feel, for the first time in 3,000 years. Just a little bit afraid, Queen Cythera the Eternal sat upon her throne of living crystal and watched the stars burn beyond the great windows of her palace. She had watched those same stars for over 3,000 years. She had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore. She had conquered worlds without number and crushed rebellions without count. Nothing in the galaxy surprised her anymore, until now. The reports from Throne Station had begun as minor notes in the endless stream of information that flowed to her advisors. A disturbance in the slave pits. A guard killed. A prisoner escaped. Such things happened occasionally. Small sparks of defiance that were quickly stamped out and forgotten, but these sparks were not going out. They were spreading. General Varax stood before her throne, his crystalline armor gleaming in the light of the captive sun that powered her palace. He was her most trusted military commander, a veteran of 1,000 campaigns. Right now, he looked deeply uncomfortable. "Speak," Cythera commanded. Her voice echoed through the vast throne room like the toll of a great bell. The situation in the slave pits has escalated, my queen, Verax said. His compound eyes flickered with nervous energy. In the past 3 months, we have lost 17 overseers. Sabotage incidents have increased by 400%. Production in the mining sectors has dropped by nearly half. And the neural control systems are experiencing failures we cannot explain. Cythera leaned forward. Our technology has controlled slaves for millennia. It does not simply fail. We do not understand it ourselves, my queen. The systems appear to function normally, but they are less effective. Some slaves seem to have developed a resistance to the pain protocols. Others are finding ways to block the signals entirely. And the cause of this resistance? Verax hesitated. A human, my queen. A single human male, captured from a damaged shuttle in the outer spiral. His name is Elias Vance. He was a commander in the Earth Coalition before the war. Us! Cythera's ancient eyes narrowed. She knew of humans, of course. The Dominion had been at war with their coalition for decades now. They were an irritating species, short-lived and physically weak, yet somehow impossible to truly defeat. Every time the Dominion destroyed one of their fleets, they built another. Every time the Dominion conquered one of their colonies, they established 3 more. They were like insects that refused to be crushed. One human, she said slowly. One human has disrupted my station, killed my soldiers, and somehow broken technology that has functioned perfectly for 3,000 years. It appears so, my queen. The other slaves have begun to follow him. They call him names in their own languages. Names that translate roughly to the Unchained One. The Defiant. The Fire that does not die? Verax paused. There are even those who whisper that he is the one from the old prophecy. Cythera went very still. The prophecy. She had read those ancient words long ago, carved into the walls of the architect's last temple, before that mysterious species vanished from the galaxy. Most of her people dismissed the prophecy as myth, the ramblings of a dying civilization. But Cythera remembered every word. When darkness covers all the stars, and the Dominion's shadow falls across every world, the Unchained One shall rise from the species of defiance. Not through strength of arm, but strength of will. They shall remind the galaxy that tyranny is not forever, for millennia. She had wondered which species the architects meant. She had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, looking for the species of defiance. She had never found them, but humans. These strange, stubborn, illogical creatures who fought wars they could not win and died for causes they could not explain. These beings who valued something called hope above their own survival. They were the youngest species in the galaxy, and yet they had resisted the Dominion longer than civilizations 10 times their age. My generals advise a complete purge of the slave pits, Verax continued. Kill all the slaves. Replace them with new stock. It is the efficient solution. No, Cythera said. Verax looked up in surprise. My queen? I have killed billions of beings in my lifetime, General. I have burned worlds and shattered moons. I have forgotten more deaths than most species will ever know. And yet, the Dominion grows weaker with each century. Our borders contract. Our enemies multiply. I have won every battle, and yet I am slowly losing the war. She stood from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Perhaps it is time to try something different. What would you have me do? Bring me the human. Not in chains. Not as a prisoner. Bring him to my throne room as a guest. I wish to speak with this Unchained One. Verax stared at her. My queen, he has killed our soldiers. He has organized rebellion against your rule. He deserves execution, not an audience. What he deserves is irrelevant. What matters is what I can learn from him. Cythera's eyes blazed with an ancient light. In 3,000 years, I have never met a being who truly challenged me. Not in battle, but in spirit. I have conquered the strong and broken the proud. But this human is neither strong nor proud. He is simply unbreakable. I wish to understand why. The summons went out that very cycle. Elias Vance was found in the deep tunnels, surrounded by his growing band of followers. When the guards arrived, everyone expected violence. But Elias simply listened to their message, nodded once, and stood. "You cannot go," Cora said, her amphibian face twisted with worry. "It is a trap. She will kill you," perhaps Elias said. "But if there is a chance to face her directly, to understand our enemy, I must take it." "Then let us come with you," Torvin said, his 4 hands clenched into fists. "We will fight," Elias shook his head. "No, if I do not return, the rebellion must continue. You are stronger than you know. All of you. You were strong before I arrived. You will be strong after I am gone." He walked toward the guards alone. He did not look back, though his heart ached at leaving behind the family he had found in this dark place. Whatever awaited him in the throne room of the Eternal Queen, he would face it the way humans had always faced impossible odds. With his head held high and his spirit unbroken, the throne room of Cythera. The Eternal was designed to make visitors feel small. Elias understood this the moment he stepped through the towering doors. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into shadow. The floor was made of transparent crystal, revealing the endless void of space beneath his feet. Massive pillars carved from a single piece of solidified starlight lined the path to the throne. And everywhere, thousands of Zithrani nobles stood watching with their compound eyes, their bodies gleaming like statues made of precious gems. Elias walked forward. His boots echoed on the crystal floor. He could feel every eye upon him, measuring him, judging him. To these ancient beings, he must have looked pathetic. A small, soft creature with fragile bones and a lifespan measured in mere decades. A speck of dust that dared to stand in the presence of gods. He kept walking. Queen. Cythera sat upon her throne at the far end of the chamber. She was massive, easily 5 times his size, her body covered in crystalline plates that shifted and glowed with inner light. Her eyes were ancient beyond measure, holding the weight of 3,000 years of memory. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the entire room, making the very air vibrate. "So you are the human who has caused such trouble in my station?" Elias stopped at a respectful distance. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood and met her gaze. "I am Elias Vance," he said. "Commander of the Earth Coalition, 3rd Fleet, or at least, I was." "You were defeated at Meridian 9, Cythera said. "Your fleet was destroyed. Your coalition declared you dead. You have nothing left. No rank, no authority, no hope of rescue. By all logic, you should have accepted your fate as a slave and lived out your short remaining years in quiet obedience. Logic has never been humanity's strong point." A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Some hissed with anger at his disrespect. Others simply stared, unable to comprehend a creature so small speaking so boldly. Cythera raised one massive limb, and silence fell instantly. "I have studied your species, human. You are not impressive by any measure. Your bodies are weak. Your technology is primitive. Your lifespans are laughable. You have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. You cannot breathe underwater or survive in vacuum. By every standard of evolution, you should have died out long ago. And yet we are still here," Elias said. "Yes." Cythera leaned forward, and Elias felt the weight of her attention like a physical force. "That is what fascinates me. You are still here. Your coalition has been at war with my dominion for 60 years. We have destroyed dozens of your fleets. We have conquered 17 of your worlds. We have killed millions of your people. And still, you fight. Still, you build new ships and train new soldiers and send them to die against us. We call it stubbornness, call it insanity." Cythera's eyes glowed brighter, but the architects called it something else. They called it defiance. And they prophesied that one day the species of defiance would challenge the natural order of the galaxy. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard Vela speak of the prophecy, but he had never truly believed it. Now, hearing it from the mouth of the most powerful being in the galaxy, it felt suddenly real. "I am not a legend," he said. "I am just a man who has lost everything. That is precisely what makes you dangerous. Cythera stood from her throne, and the entire room seemed to shrink around her. I have broken countless beings in my time. I have shattered generals and crushed kings. I have made the proud beg and the strong weep, but they all had something to lose. Power, wealth, life itself. You have none of these things. You have nothing left except your will. And that, human, is something I cannot take from you. She descended from her throne, each step making the floor tremble. The nobles backed away, clearing a path. Soon, she stood directly before Elias, towering over him like a mountain over a pebble. "Tell me," she said, "what do you hope to accomplish? You cannot defeat my armies. You cannot escape my station. Even if your little rebellion succeeds, you will die here, light years from your home, surrounded by enemies. What is the point?" Elias looked up at her. He thought about his daughter, lost at Meridian 9. He thought about his crew, burned to ash in the void between stars. He thought about Cora and Torvin and little Mira and all the other slaves who had remembered their names because he had asked. "The point," he said, "is not whether I win. The point is that I fight. The point is that others see me fight and remember that they can fight too. You have ruled through fear for 3,000 years. But here's the truth about fear, Your Majesty. It only works as long as people believe they have no choice." "And you have given them a choice?" "No," Elias smiled, and there was something fierce and unbreakable in that smile. "I have reminded them that the choice was always theirs." At that moment, the lights in the throne room flickered. A deep rumbling sound echoed from somewhere far below. Cythera's compound eyes shifted, looking at something Elias could not see. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Elias gestured toward the transparent floor. "Look." Cythera looked down. Through the crystal, she could see the lower levels of Throne Station. Lights were going out in cascading waves. Explosions bloomed in the shipyards like flowers of fire. Emergency alarms began to wail, their sounds muffled by the throne room's walls. And carved into the very hull of the station, burning bright enough to be seen from space, were 4 words in a language the Dominion had never bothered to learn. "We remember our names." "The Corvethi have been reprogramming your systems for months," Elias said. "The Delphine have infiltrated your life support. The Graxi have been training in the abandoned sectors. 17 species, working together in secret. All it took was someone to remind them that they were more than slaves." The nobles erupted into chaos. Guards rushed in all directions. Cythera's generals screamed orders that no one followed, and in the middle of it all, Elias Vance stood calmly before the Eternal Queen. "You asked what I hope to accomplish," he said. "I hope to show the galaxy that your dominion is not unbreakable, that your power is not absolute, that even the smallest, weakest, most insignificant beings can change the course of history if they simply refuse to give." Up, Cythera stared at him with eyes that had seen the birth of stars. "You are either the bravest being I've ever met," she said slowly, "or the most foolish." Leah shrugged. "With humans, it is usually both." The Battle of Throne Station lasted 7 days. It would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. Not because of the weapons used or the tactics employed, but because of what it represented. For the first time in 3,000 years, the slaves of the Celestial Dominion had risen against their masters. And they had won. The victory did not come from superior firepower. The slaves had none. It did not come from greater numbers. The Zithrani military could have crushed them in hours if properly organized. The victory came from something far simpler and far more powerful: coordination, trust, the willingness to sacrifice for each other. The Corvathi engineers had spent months secretly reprogramming the station's systems. When the signal came, they shut down power to the military sectors and opened doors that had been sealed for centuries. The Delphine, who could breathe in atmospheres toxic to other species, infiltrated the life support centers and began releasing sleeping gas into the guard barracks. The Graxi, descendants of a proud warrior race, led the charge into the armories and distributed weapons to anyone who would fight. And at the center of it all, directing operations from a hidden control room deep in the station's core, was a council of 17 species who had never worked together before. They spoke different languages. They had different customs. Some of their peoples had been enemies before the Dominion conquered them all. But Elias Vance had taught them something that transcended their differences. He had taught them that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. On the third day, the Zithrani fleet attempted to retake the station from outside, but the Korvathi had already taken control of the defense systems. For the first time in history, Dominion weapons fired upon Dominion ships. The fleet was crippled before it could respond. On the fifth day, the noble houses of the Zithrani began to evacuate. They fled to their personal ships, carrying their wealth and their pride, leaving behind the soldiers who had served them loyally for millennia. Watching them run, many Zithrani warriors began to question whether their masters were truly worth dying for. On the seventh day, the fighting stopped. Not because one side had surrendered, but because there was no one left to fight. The guards who remained had been given a choice: lay down your weapons and join us, or leave and never return. Most of them chose to leave. A surprising number chose to stay. Throughout all of this, Elias Vance and Queen Sithara remained in the throne room, not as prisoner and captor, but as two beings caught in the eye of a storm. Watching the galaxy change around them, Sithara could have killed him at any moment. Her personal guards, the elite of the elite, still surrounded her throne. But she made no move to harm him. Instead, she watched. She listened. She saw her empire crumble with an expression that was impossible to read. When the final reports came in, when it was clear that Throne Station had fallen and the slave rebellion had succeeded, Sithara finally spoke. "Do you know how many rebellions I have crushed in my lifetime?" she asked. Her voice was quiet now, stripped of the power and authority that had filled it before. "I can imagine," Elias said.
Thousands.
"Perhaps tens of thousands. I have lost count." She looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed very old and very tired. They all followed the same pattern. A charismatic leader would rise. They would gather followers. They would fight bravely for a time. And then they would be destroyed, because in the end, they were fighting for themselves. For power, for revenge, for glory. And those things can be taken away? What makes this different? You. Sithara gestured toward the transparent floor, where the words "we remember our names" still burned against the darkness of space. You gave them nothing except the belief that they mattered. You asked for nothing except that they remember who they were. You did not make yourself a king or a general or a god. You simply reminded them that they were people. Elias said nothing. He thought about the faces of those he had come to love in the slave pits. Cora, who dreamed of oceans she barely remembered. Torvin, who had rediscovered the warrior spirit of his ancestors. Little Myra, who was probably too young to understand what had happened, but who would grow up in a galaxy where her people were free. "The architects spoke of your kind in their prophecy," Sithara continued. "The species of defiance. I always wondered what that meant. I thought it meant a species that could not be conquered. But I was wrong." She rose from her throne and took a step toward him. "It means a species that helps others refuse to be conquered. A species that spreads defiance like a disease. A species that makes slaves believe they can be free simply by believing it themselves." She stopped directly in front of him. Up close, she was even more massive, more ancient, more powerful. And yet, in that moment, she did not seem like a tyrant. She seemed like a being who had lived too long and seen too much, and was only now beginning to understand how much she had missed. "I dismissed the prophecy because I could not imagine a species so irrational," she said, "so willing to sacrifice themselves for others. So stubbornly, foolishly, impossibly hopeful." She bowed her head, a gesture of respect that no Zithrani queen had shown to any lesser being in 3,000 years. "It is true then," she said softly. "You really are the human of legend." Elias felt something shift in that moment. Not just in the throne room, not just on Throne Station, but across the entire galaxy. Word would spread. stories would be told. A human had faced the Eternal Queen and had not looked away. A human had reminded 1 billion slaves that they were more than property. A human had proven that the Dominion was not unbreakable. "I am just a man," he said. "A broken man who lost everything and somehow found a reason to keep fighting." That, Cythera said, is exactly what makes your species so dangerous. You break and you keep fighting. You lose everything and you find new things to care about. You face impossible odds and refuse to calculate them. She straightened to her full height. "The Dominion will not fall today. My empire is vast, and this is but one station. But you have shown me something I had forgotten. What is that?" "That eternity is lonely." Her ancient eyes seemed to look through him, into some distance he could not see. "I have ruled for 3,000 years without equal, without challenge, without anyone who could truly understand me. And in all that time, I have never met a being who made me feel ... curious until now." She turned away and walked toward the great windows that looked out upon the stars. "Go, human of legend. Take your people and leave my station. I will not stop you. But know this: the galaxy has changed today, and neither of us can predict what will happen next." Elias watched her for a moment, this ancient being who had terrified 1,000 worlds. Then he turned and walked out of the throne room, out of the palace, out into a station that was no longer a prison. His people were waiting for him. Corvathian, Delphine, and Graxi, and a dozen other species, all looking at him with hope in their eyes. Not worship. It's not fear. Just hope. "What happens now?" Cora asked. Ilias smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in years. "Now," he said, "we go home. All of us, and we tell the galaxy what we have done here. We tell them that chains can be broken, that tyrants can be challenged, that no matter how dark the night becomes, the light of hope never truly dies." They cheered. They wept. They embraced each other like family. Because that is what they had become, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, on 100 different worlds, beings who had given up long ago heard the story of the human of legend and began to remember their names. The Dominion did not fall that day, but it had cracked. And in the cracks, the seeds of freedom had taken root. All because one broken man had refused to stop hoping,